What does humanity's impact on the Earth actually look like? When I say post-apocalypse, what's the type of mental imagery that comes to mind? What type of art is made on a planet in decline? Before we get to these big questions, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the channel. This is Contemporary Tart, a new channel about contemporary art, pop culture, and ideas. I would be remiss if I introduced this channel without actually including any tarts, so today's tart is a Monster energy drink flavored tart, inspired by the product placement in Death Stranding. It was made by my good friends over at Packaged Food Gourmet, so you can see how the whole thing was made from start to finish. I'll be trying this tart at the end of the video, but be sure to go over and give Packaged Food Gourmet a like and subscribe to help support their channel to make it grow. And you can do the same for this channel as well. The term Anthropocene comes from the Greek words anthropo for man and scene for new. This era is said to be the one in which human impact on the Earth has become so forceful that we're seeing shifting seas, changes in climate, and the disappearance of countless species, as well as placing humanity itself at the brink of extinction. The Anthropocene announces the collapse of the future. The concept of an era marked by human-driven change is fairly straightforward, but its origins are in dispute. Some geologists argue that the epoch began with the Industrial Revolution, with trains, factories, and manufacturing, as well as increasing globalization. However, there's many other speculative origins. Others believe that the Anthropocene began in 1950 with the Great Acceleration, which was a dramatic increase in human activity after World War II. Other anthropologists suggest that the seeds of the Anthropocene lie in the first agricultural revolution that began some 10,000 years ago. This is an epoch that is challenged, its terms and scope are in dispute, but it is obvious that this distinction from other time periods was necessary enough to name. This designation, while it may be flawed, is the beginning of our acknowledgement of our own impact on the world, but it doesn't tell us how to form feelings about it. That's a role that art can play. I'd like to share a few examples of artworks that speak to the Anthropocene in some way. These artists are asking us to think about humanity's impact on the Earth. This is by no means an exhaustive list of artists or artworks. It's simply a list that I felt compelled enough to speak about due to their impact or intrigue. I wanted to start with David Gilmore Blythe's Prospecting Bull Creek City, because it was made toward the beginning of the oil boom in North America. It shows a man looking for work in a destroyed landscape. At this time, many people strongly believed in a linear concept of progress, that more oil and more money were unconditionally good things. Blythe's painting deeply questioned that. He asked, are pollution and environmental degradation really signs of progress? He framed the oil industry as an alarming deviation from, and even an obstacle to, technological modernity and national progress. Moving ahead in time, Emily Carr painted Scorned as Timber, Beloved of the Sky in 1935. This is a painting of the last few trees left standing in a clear-cut on southern Vancouver Island. Industrial logging began in British Columbia, Canada in the 1860s. Carr lived in a place that experienced a particularly intense amount of clear-cuts, and still does to this day. She saw the stumps that remained as tombstones, and to her these marked a place of ecological violence. Often paired with Emily Carr in exhibitions, Edward Burtynsky's large-scale photographs document ongoing ecological devastation in our own time. He photographs massive oil spills in the Gulf of Mexico, tar sands extraction in Canada, ivory burning in Africa, and massive mines in Russia. He often takes his photographs from the air to capture the truly astronomical scale of the environmental impact. For Olafur Eliasson's Ice Watch, he extracted 30 blocks of glacial ice from the waters around Greenland and had them placed in front of the Tate Modern in London. The ice was left to melt, and people were urged to interact with it and bear witness to its disappearance. While the artwork is emotionally engaging, it's worth noting that a lot of money and oil were used to move Arctic ice to an urban location. In 2018, artist Douglas Copland partnered with the Vancouver Aquarium to host Vortex, an exhibition about plastic in the ocean. He placed a small Japanese fishing vessel in a tank formerly inhabited by manta rays, surrounding it with debris pulled from the Pacific Ocean. The boat installation was surrounded by smaller artworks that were placed inside fish tanks. Lastly, Sun and Sea Marina was the artwork to see at the 58th Venice Biennale in 2019. Defined as an opera performance by the artists, this artwork represented Lithuania and won a Golden Lion Award. Viewers walked into the building and looked down upon a beach scene with performers singing. Aside from its tone, viewers might not have even realized this was a climate crisis-related artwork, but it's precisely this element of subtlety that speaks to our lack of ecological concern. Some non-documentary films that directly or indirectly deal with the consequences of the climate crisis are Children of Men, Don't Look Up, Snowpiercer, and Interstellar. Some music that speaks to it is Joni Mitchell's Big Yellow Taxi from 1970.
Paradise, put up a parking lot.
Or Woodkid's album S16 from 2020. Through these examples, we can see that art is beginning to help us understand what the Anthropocene era actually looks like. It's destroyed landscapes, melting ice, and plastic bobbing around in the oceans. In a way, there's an odd beauty to this horrifying imagery. These artworks show us the tremendous scale of humanity's impact in a way that a written paragraph or a statistic just can't. This is what we're seeing and living with right now, and it imparts a lot of despair. Humanity's negative impacts clearly can't be prevented because they've already happened and continue to happen, and yet we're all still here, living against this ongoing destruction. While art about this topic is important, we need to accept that museums and galleries might not be the setting to help us solve the climate crisis. Museums may be more equipped to fill with water than they are able to help the average person. This isn't a shot at museums. They do have immense cultural value, but this isn't something they were ever designed to help us with. What museums and galleries are designed for is to help us safely and securely display art and artifacts, and then to welcome people to view them. They can't really do much else. After all, budgetary and architectural constraints are very real. The powers of the museum, while they seem pretty great, are limited. What these institutions can do to help their communities is to show art, tell stories, and host events that support ecological stewardship and critical thought about the climate crisis. Museums and galleries can be our allies in facilitating many of our artistic and cultural experiences, but they can't do it all. They can't reach every single one of us as potential viewers because they're limited by their location and digital resources. Additionally, only a small amount of artworks will make it into museums in the first place because there's only so many exhibitions that can fit into a year. Luckily, artists don't exclusively create work that's made for galleries and museums. Artists create works for many projects, personal and commercial, that will never appear in an art world setting, and that's okay. Not every artwork has to. So let's take a look at a different kind of cultural product that might have a different audience. In 1986, Ursula K. Guin wrote The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction. This short essay described her approach to writing science fiction. She believed that
science fiction, properly conceived, like all serious fiction, is a way of trying to describe what is in fact going on, what people actually do and feel, how people relate to everything else in this unending story.
She goes on to claim that we need new stories because for most of human history, stories have been understood as a hero's struggle to overcome whatever opposes him. The caveman kills the mammoth, the king kills the bull, and the knight slays the dragon. These stories are fine, because they are the stories of some people, but in them there's clear winners and losers. Good guys and bad guys make stories easy to understand, but viewing the climate crisis as a conflict, as something to be fought against and won, might not be the best framework to help us understand the state of the world or our place within it. As Guin puts it, we need to create stories with a strange realism to refer to our strange reality. For example, instead of stories where a hero wields a weapon to participate in conflicts, she proposes another approach. What if stories were seen instead as containers? Containers may not seem as interesting or as valorous as weapons, but Guin argues that they've been an essential part of human life for much longer. After all, our earliest human ancestors had to figure out how to store, transport, and trade food and goods for their survival. There would have been no agricultural revolution or human progress without some form of storage. A story could be seen as a big bag full of small pieces of everything in our day-to-day lives, instead of what it typically is: a single hero, a stick, and someone to hit. In Death Stranding, a video game released in 2019, the player controls Sam Porter Bridges, a delivery man in a post-apocalyptic near-future version of the USA. Most of the country's infrastructure has been reduced to ruins, and Sam navigates from the east coast to the west on foot to carry containers of cargo for the company Bridges. Before each delivery, the player prepares for the mission by arranging containers on Sam's body. They have to distribute the weight of the containers, consider Sam's ease of movement, and think about how best to protect the items from damage. Some of the containers he delivers are vital to keeping people alive, containing items such as medicine, whereas others contain technology or specimens to facilitate scientific discoveries. Sometimes he just delivers pizza, but I'd argue that's pretty important too. If there were no containers, there would be no story. There would be no Death Stranding. At its most basic level, this story is about a man risking his life to deliver containers of goods between people. Every item means a long, difficult hike for Sam, and by extension for you, the player, but these containers become the foundation of every relationship in the game. To Sam, the most important container is the one that contains BB-28.
It's 'cause we're partners.
BBs, or bridge babies, are a technology developed by the US government to connect the world of the living with the world of the dead. Each BB is an unborn child taken from a brain-dead mother, and they're kept in a balanced state of suspension between life and death in a pod that functions as an artificial womb. BBs are intended to be used as equipment. They're used to sense BTs, or beach things, that take the form of aggressive ghosts anchored to the world of the living through spectral umbilical cords. Over the course of the game, after many long journeys and cooperative missions, Sam and BB-28 form a strong bond. This precious container comes to represent a future for Sam that he thought was impossible after the tragic death of his wife and unborn child. In Death Stranding, even the body itself is a container.
There's no cargo to deliver this time. Or rather, you're the cargo. That's the mission.
Gross.
The body is where the soul lives, and when the soul becomes separated from the body, there can be disastrous consequences. This separation can lead to a void out, which is a large explosion that decimates everything caught in it, leaving behind residual BTs to roam the devastation like radiation from a nuclear blast. The game's lore tells us that the soul can be detached from the body with an immense amount of violence or pain. Traumatic events like war, familial loss, and cancer can cause characters to split into halves across life and death.
I was split across two worlds. Bridget, my ha in that one. Amelie, my ka in this. Somehow, the two of us managed to coexist.
As if to fully establish that this isn't the same type of story as many that came before it, and unlike many other video games, Death Stranding features unconventional methods of engaging with conflict that deprioritize weapons. In Le Guin's terms, we are reminded that the containers, the shipments, are our priority, not weapons. This is a natural progression of creator Hideo Kojima's design philosophy, as many of his other games incentivize the player to use non-lethal approaches to progress through the game's stories, even if non-violent engagement doesn't explicitly change the outcome of the narrative. That said, agents of conflict do exist in this story. Oxytocin-addicted delivery men turned thieves, separatist accelerationist groups, and ghostly BTs. However, the player does not typically shoot them with the intent to destroy. The player creates weapons through Sam's rest and hygiene routine in between missions. Showering and using the toilet create items that either attract or repel enemies or help neutralize human foes. Eventually, Sam's blood is drawn to create more potent weapons late in the game, but this means that the player has to decide how much they're willing to risk harming themselves in order to repel hostile threats. And if you, the player, decide to kill enemies despite all of the tools and techniques designed to avoid it, you must bring the bodies to an incinerator or you'll be punished with a void out. Furthermore, the main agents of conflict in the game aren't people that Sam can overcome. Sam's adoptive mother, Samantha Strand, convinces him to work for her company Bridges against his wishes just before she passes away from uterine cancer. Amelie, a woman that he thought was his adopted sister, turns out to be an extinction entity, the living embodiment of the 6 mass extinctions sent to destroy all life as we know it. Amelie presents an inevitable force of destruction that can't be stopped, but Sam does manage to convince her to slow down the 6 mass extinction any way she can. Sam's father, Clifford Unger, also appears as a villain at first. Cliff was a soldier in the United States Army Special Forces. His background is described in-game as being involved in fighting in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Kosovo, and he comes to represent all soldiers in modern war. Despite his participation in recent wars exclusively, from 1998 to 2020 or so, he appears in scenes that are direct references to World War I, II, and Vietnam. This implies that wars are not unrelated events in history, with all conflicts being connected across time in one way or another. In the book Oil Culture, it describes our situation with war and oil like this.
Fossil fuel culture can be, in short, described as an age of exuberance, an age that is also, given the dwindling finitude of the resources it increasingly makes social life dependent on, haunted by catastrophe. In World War I, oil exuberance was wedded all too clearly to oil catastrophe in a high-profile marriage of absolute opposites. Oil-powered destructive new machinery was used in making destructive weapons and fueled a refitted British Navy superior to Germany's, which remained tied to coal. Oil helped kill millions. oil led to victory. In the context of World War II, the same description still fits. Again, the Allies floated to victory on a sea of oil.
Petrocapitalism, our economic and cultural system, is driven by oil extraction, violence, wealth, and power, and it tends to inflict its damaging consequences on people more often than it shares its wealth. Clifford's trust and loyalty to the American government led to the destruction of his family. It turns out that while he was an enforcer of the petrocapitalist system, he was also a victim of it. By the end of the game, Sam discovers that the soldier that has been pursuing him throughout his journeys was actually his emotionally devastated and war-traumatized father. Not a figure to be destroyed or overcome, but someone to build bridges with.
But not you, Sam. You bring people together. You're their bridge to the future. And mine.
As if to drive home the need for alternatives to conflicts and violence, the most important weapon in the game is a gun that doesn't fire. After slowing down the sixth mass extinction, Sam becomes stranded on a beach in the afterlife. He receives a gun from Amelie that he can't shoot, and if he tries, it has no effect. He can't use it to stop the extinction event, but this former symbol of violence becomes the link that allows Sam's friends to find him and bring him home. It turns out that the gun is more of a container than it is a weapon.
Ironic, isn't it? The gun that set this whole mess in motion ends up being the key to saving you.
Amelie, she said it had another purpose.
Not a weapon, but a lifeline. A stick that became a rope. I suppose that's one way of putting it.
According to the framework proposed in Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction, Death Stranding presents a new science fiction story that asks the player to think about and repair a world in ruin. It asks us to consider all the things that we carry on an individual and societal level, and it pushes us to understand that weapons shouldn't be the first thing we reach for to solve our problems. It shows us that the sixth extinction event is underway, and it's undeniably linked to war, oil, and resource extraction, as well as intergenerational trauma. The game's story is incredibly complex, and it's slowly revealed to the player through dialogue between characters, cutscenes, emails, and gameplay, with the average playthrough taking approximately 40 to 50 hours. There's no way that I can address all of its details in a single video, so to get back to the question at hand, how does this video game, this cultural product created by a team of artists and makers, teach us about life in the Anthropocene? Le Guin wrote,
"In science fiction, as in all fiction, there is room enough to keep even man where he belongs, in his place in the scheme of things."
Death Stranding takes great care with the idea of keeping man where he belongs in the scheme of things. Its story speaks to the scale of the sixth mass extinction event by putting it in context with the 5 previous extinction events, as well as the entire history of the Earth and cosmos. The player acts as Sam in the future present, his body marked with the cave wall handprints from our distant past, as he tries to navigate through life, death, and the states in between. The game makes use of big storytelling by slowly moving us through a narrative that's painstakingly considering our full history. This way of thinking is called deep history, and it's the study of all life from the Big Bang forward. The game spans a large swath of time, and it specifically invokes the following events. The game opens with a mention of the Big Bang. It covers mass extinction events 1 through 5. It shows us the cave paintings of our distant ancestors. It mentions the 6th mass extinction. It speaks to Egyptian mythology, the making of the Kipu, the creation of Misanga, the making of Ojibwe dreamcatchers, Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci's voyage to the South American coast. It invokes the oil boom and the start of oil dependency. It covers World War I, II, and Vietnam. It mentions the development of social media and the Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan wars. For reference, anatomically modern humans emerged around 300,000 years ago in Africa. These historical events aren't just listed off without purpose. They are fundamental markers of time. The deep past ripples outward to impact the future in ways that we're only beginning to understand. The story plainly states that death and mass die-offs aren't inherently bad, despite the doom that surrounds climate crisis discourse, and in fact, they're rather routine in the grand scheme of life on Earth. There were 5 other major extinction events, and many other lesser die-offs. This great dying episode is particularly traumatic to us because we intimately understand our own culpability, and yet many of us feel powerless to make substantial changes. Our lives are so deeply affected by petrocapitalism as an economic system that changing our reliance away from oil and natural gases would wildly disrupt how we currently live our lives. Again, as described in the book Oil Culture,
together, oil and electricity wrapped people within their many infrastructures: roads, pipelines, telephone lines, power cables, even as it began doing something else of great cultural importance, reaching into and restructuring people's private worlds, identities, bodies, thoughts, sense of geography, and emotions.
In looking at this big history timeline again, we may get the feeling that our needs and lifestyles as a species are at odds with what is sustainable for the Earth and its other inhabitants, and we would be right to think so. Something noted in the plot of Death Stranding is that rebuilding America requires constructing roads and connecting everyone to the chiral network, which is kind of like an in-game version of the internet. But much like in our world, there are consequences to this kind of development. Technology is the cause of, as well as the solution to, many of the problems in the story. The chiral network is supposed to resolve many of the ongoing systemic and social issues, including fulfilling people's need for oxytocin and scarce resources. However, that need for social bonding and connectivity is presented as a double-edged sword. We build tools in our likeness and for our needs, which has ramifications for all other forms of life, human and non-human, past and present. Video games themselves are a type of technology too. The history of video games is interconnected with the military-industrial complex and petrocapitalism. The industry has been funded and inspired by war and made possible through petro products. The controller you use to navigate through virtual spaces, the consoles that power your games, the fuel used to transport equipment used for game development, and the energy used to extract rare minerals for computer hardware. These things have a real cost, but they also engage and connect us, and that has real value too. Death Stranding understands that it is implicated in these systems by its very existence, and instead of ignoring these ugly affiliations, it leans into them and lives with them, just like the rest of us have to in our day-to-day lives.
This bike is so cool. It should be on ride for Wolverines.
Through his storytelling, Kojima expresses his anthropogenic concerns around petrodependence, while at the same time admitting his love for petro products. He added a stash of collectible items to the game that range from motorbikes to mechs. We all live in these contradictions to some extent. Death Stranding's narrative places the 6th mass extinction in context by showing us how everything we do is shaped by what came before it. It then asks us, if dying is inevitable because the 6th mass extinction is already underway, what do we decide to live for? We've all seen extensive footage of devastating pollution and ecological damage. We know the situation's bad. Because of this, many people don't want to hear about or acknowledge the Anthropocene, let alone engage with it in the art and media they consume. It's a very difficult topic to address in art without coming off as preachy or as a doomer, and it's hard to talk about the topic without being reliant on cliches. But the visual language we've developed and the stories that we tell about our current era have to change. They have to change because we need to find new ways to think about what our priorities should be during the ongoing climate crisis. We have to reach people. According to the World Scientists' Warning of a Climate Emergency from 2021 in the Journal of Bioscience, there is mounting evidence that we are nearing or have already crossed tipping points associated with critical parts of the Earth's systems. At this point, it's as Higgs says.
You can speed this up or slow it down. You cannot stop what we've started. Next level trust issue.
So why am I invested in this topic? I experienced Death Stranding in summer 2021 when my mother was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer. At the same time as I was assisting her, I was writing my Master's of Fine Arts thesis on 3D environmental narrative simulators and video games. When I'd take breaks, I'd frequently visit nearby beaches. But that year, more than 1 billion seashore animals cooked to death in the unprecedented heat waves in British Columbia. The shore of the Pacific Ocean reeked like death. The sickness and weight of humanity's impact on the world was so heavy, and it still is. But Death Stranding reminded me to put one foot in front of another.
One foot right in front of the other.
It tells us that humanity's time on Earth will end. It is ending. It's ending because of our actions and our ancestors' actions, and even if we were able to correct for all of that, we're still just another creature waiting for just another extinction event. There have been 5 mass extinctions to date. What makes us think that the 6th is special, even if we've caused it? This situation is, to some degree, normal. But the game suggests that even though our existence as a species is temporary, we should strive to be helpful, nurturing, and kind for the short time we're here. It tells us that we can still build networks and communities that prioritize care and resilience. We can and should appreciate the sunlight and flowers that remain. We must look for new narratives to imagine new futures. The world is in collapse, but even collapse takes time. We should want the fall of humanity to be slow, because if it's slow enough, we can continue to live our lives even if it's in this state of freefall. We can make use of our lives in this ever-declining state by choosing to make the experience better for others, both human and non-human. We may not get to decide the circumstances of our birth, but we can make being alive as comfortable as possible given the circumstances. And we should want to give future generations as much time as possible before the inevitable end because that's what we'd want for ourselves. Death Stranding teaches us that hope is a result of our actions as much as it is standing before the painful truths of life and death. Hope is a facet of the human experience just as much as pollution and extincting species are. Life is both short and long, and it's made up of everything that has happened and will happen. It can be sped up or slowed down, but it can't be stopped. Not yet, anyway.
Keep on keeping on.
Okay, now I'm gonna try this tart. Oh, it's pretty good. That's kind of unexpected. Would try again.